It's another Mind Games with me, Gareth Roberts, Paul Cope and sports psychologist Bradley Busch again. In this one we're going to talk about title races, the pressure of maintaining a standard, the pressure of maintaining or creating a legacy around the club. How do you keep going match after match, month after month, year after year? That is what Jurgen Klopp is currently doing at Liverpool. Last year 97 points and the European Cup. This season we started brilliantly, top of the league. That message though, I mean, it must be really hard, mustn't it, to sort of keep on motivating your players, keep them on your side when, everyone gets bored of things, even Premier League players, I guess.
Oh, and it's a long season.
Yeah.
And especially when you get into the winter months, when it's dark and your body's aching, that is the big challenge. Cliche as it might be, like it is a marathon, which is hard to manage when each game, individual game, feels like a sprint.
Yeah.
So managing burnout, squad selection, but also knowing that motivation, like most people have a misunderstanding of motivation. They go like, you're a motivated player or he's not motivated, but the truth is it fluctuates.
Yeah.
So accepting that and being able to pick players up for consistency is the ultimate challenge, yeah.
And I think we, as fans, do recognise that, don't we, Kobe? So we'll say, and it's a phrase that I hear all the time on the Anfield, we'll say, yeah, but what you get from, say, Robertson, for example, he's always 7 out of 10 at least. And that must be, that's what you're trying to get out of them as a manager, as a psychologist. That's what we want to see as fans as well. I mean, it's fantastic when they're 10, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But if, as you say, across the course of a season, they're regularly hitting those levels again and again and again, then they're in the right place, aren't they? But what makes them, what have you found can make a player fall away? You mentioned some of the conditions here, but...
Well, I think the consistency thing you're talking about is important. Like, so in a one-off game, if a player can get a 10 out of 10, but he might give me a 4 out of 10, you might take the gamble in a one-off game. But over the course of a season, you'll probably pick someone who gives you a 7 every time, because that's consistency. As a coach, you need to know, what am I going to get from him? Can I predict what his level is going to be at? And if you talk to, when we talk to a lot of the scouts that we work with, they'll say they judge a player for like the 5 minutes after he's made a mistake. So like, I don't necessarily care about your peak. I just want to know, is your base level high enough that even on a bad day, that's good enough? So I think for players, what they do, some strategies, they break the season down into mini sections. So the international breaks usually provide a nice, here's a 6-game or 6-week window, setting targets. But I think the way the profession's going is, it's moving away from arbitrary numbers. So you used to hear players going like, I need to be getting 10 goals before Christmas. Yeah. But there's so much out of that you can't control, like injury and selection. Whereas I think to help motivate players over the course of a season, having focus and targets around getting better and development, and knowing that if you're process focused, the outcomes will follow. Because what we've found is when you focus too much just on the outcome, you go game to game to game, but then after 5 games, you've not got any improvement because you've just been constantly treading water and too short-termism. So having that long-term view, but married with the immediacy of results, that's what I think good coaches help do.
Isn't that where Klopp has been brilliant then? Because to get 97 points, the 3rd highest total in the top league of England, and not win the league, and add on to that how much Liverpool want to win it, 29 years without one and all the rest of it. Isn't that testimony to how brilliant he is that they're still at that level?
Oh, amazingly so, yeah.
They could have, and Liverpool teams have in the past, title challenge, fall off a cliff. Yeah.
And that's why setting an arbitrary target of, if you said at the start of the season, let's aim for 97 points, it's a nonsense target because that's not your target. Your target is to win the league. So having that focus on getting better. So I think I would imagine a lot of, you can probably list quite easily which Liverpool players have got better under Klopp's management. Yeah. And that's the key, is if you can help every player get better, the numbers and the points will take care of themselves. Because if 97 points is the base level, then if your focus is on developing each player and developing the team, you'll probably get more if the team has raised their level. So that's definitely, I think, probably what he's doing.
This is a really interesting point, I think, because we've been talking about your work and this is what you do one-on-one with players. Yeah. Do you find it's easier to work with a player one-on-one if he's part of a collective that has something that he's bought into fully?
Massively, because you know it does help your motivation when you know you're playing for something bigger than just yourself. And I think so. We kind of use the phrase, you know, you master your instrument before you join the orchestra. Like if you get good at your job, and you know that your teammates are also sacrificing to get better at their job, then when you're in that changing room before the match, you look around and you go, like, I'm glad he's on my team because I know how hard he's been working this month. That makes me raise my game. Whereas when it's just words and like motivational fluff, like it doesn't mean anything. Whereas the actions of knowing how hard everyone's working for the common cause means you're more likely to self-sacrifice as well. And you were talking in the last episode about some of the midfielders maybe not getting all the glory and all the credit in the Liverpool setup, but I think they're probably happy to do that because everyone's bought in to that team structure, and that comes from the top. That comes from Klopp and his coaches.
But then as well, I think it's not just about that, is it, from the management's perspective, because another thing we always talk about in the Off-Wrap is the recruitment and how much thought goes into the recruitment, and you can tell that you know he's almost recruited as well as good players, almost like cultural leaders, if you like. Right. You know, so Milner was there already, but you know you've got Van Dijk, who's like a captain essentially. You know, you've got Firmino, who never ever stops running no matter what game he plays it. So you've got these, you know, you can't be at Liverpool as a kid, you know, say Curtis Jones, and train with the first team and not go, I've got to run my arse off every week because look at these fellas.
And what that does is it's self-policing.
Yeah.
So you don't need Klopp and his coaches telling Curtis Jones or whoever to run more, because the players will take care of that.
Yeah.
And B, you can usually measure the quality of a group by like the unwritten rules. So like we don't have to have this conversation of we all work hard. It's not written down as like a team rule, but that's just what we do here. And when that becomes the norm, then the next generation, they just assume that's the way it has to be, and so it becomes self-fulfilling, and they in turn teach it to someone else. And that's why having strong leaders is massive, because there's like this ripple effect. It's called, the technical term is emotional contagion. Like you kind of just pick up the habits of the people around you. Yeah. And that's what seems to be going so well at the moment with Liverpool.
Yeah. I'm lost in it again. Yeah. Well, the thing about me on this topic, is, which goes beyond sort of where we are now, is how do you sustain that? How do you, because especially when we were talking about this the other day when we were talking about coming to speak to you, if you look at Man City now, they've had 2 years at this level that we're in uncharted territory, I think. No other football club has ever done this. They've never gone 100 points, 98 points, and then basically have to do it again. When United, we were chatting that when United did 3 on the bounce, if you look back at the points tallies they got at the time, it was nowhere near this. They were, don't get me wrong, they're elite and they sustained it. And it seems at the moment, even if you look at Pep Guardiola, that he seems to be struggling a bit psychologically, and they've dipped. And they might even dip, Joe, they might dip to, well, fingers crossed, 90 points. They might not. They could still get 100 points. It's still possible. But let's say they dip to 90. Still a phenomenal football season. But in the grand scheme of things, might not win the league, a bit like us last year. How is it possible to sustain such an elite level? Or from a psychology perspective, do you just have to sort of plan in some dips?
I mean, it is like there is a cycle. And it is impossible for anyone in any profession to perform at their peak consistently over X amount of years without having dips. And of course in sport, and especially in the Premiership, those dips are noticeable and they're very public. One of the things that the way to try and maintain that, in answer to your question, everyone talks about mental toughness, and it's kind of the wrong phrase, whereas actually, because like tough things tend to, under enough pressure, tend to snap. And we tend to talk more about flexibility, like mental flexibility. And what we mean by that is, I think, on match day, I think you need to go out there believing you are number one. No one is better than your position. Your teammates are better than the opponents, and like you are the favourites. But then the flexibility comes on in training. I think you almost need to train like you feel like you're number two, like you've got that hunger to keep going, because that's where the self-improvement comes from. Whereas if you always feel like you're number one, although that short term might help your confidence, long term probably doesn't lead to motivation and development because you feel like at some level I've made it, like job done. So having that hunger in training with that confidence on match day, that's I think how you maintain peak performance over time.
And presumably that's just the really difficult balance to strike, and that's where you end up with players going, no, but I am number one, and that's when their training dips, and then it has
and especially because football still has a relatively old school mentality, whereas surely it's good to maintain that I see myself as the number one. There's that bravado, and there's that masculinity. But there's been some nice research in other sports that found teams or individual players who have a high-performing rival do better.
Yeah.
Like, so your Federer, Nadal, Man City, Liverpool, like, it can be a good thing because it can spur you to raise your game and not rest on your laurels, because without it, it's really hard to maintain that.
Is there a problem for you in your profession that basically football's daft? And what I mean by that is, so for instance, you know, we're talking here about Man City and Liverpool, clearly two elite sides, clearly two squads full of brilliant players, managed by brilliant managers. And yet, you know, I can remember again, we referenced this in one of the other shows, when Steve Peters was at Liverpool, he did an interview with The Independent, and he was obviously trying to, you know, talk about things in basic terms that people who were reading it would understand. And he said, I've said to the players that you shouldn't be aiming to win the league. You should be aiming to do the best you can and improve yourself, like you were talking about before. That went in the paper.
Of course, and it got to...
And Liverpool fans are like, what?
Yeah.
Every year we should be trying to win the league. Why have they brought this fella in and he's saying you shouldn't be aiming to win the league?
Yeah.
And do you know what I mean? So does that make it difficult? Because that type of stuff filters to players as well. And even like sort of what you hear pundits saying and things like that. There's loads of counterproductive messages around football, isn't there?
And I can understand exactly what he was saying. He was saying if you perform at the best of your ability, you give yourself the best chance of winning the league.
Exactly.
So let's focus on performing at the best of your ability and kind of like see where the cards end up, how they get
Because
down.
ultimately you can't control Man City,
Exactly.
for instance.
But there is that, in the media, the perception still of sports psychology is sometimes good, sometimes less so. I think the players will know what he would have meant because most of the conversations with players, so let's take any Liverpool player you like, his focus on any given week, he'll probably be working on some part of his game, either a strength to maximise or a weakness that the coach has identified. And he knows if he gets better at that thing, the team have a better chance of winning and therefore a better chance of winning the league. That's not to say he doesn't care about winning the league, but how he's going to achieve that or how he's going to help contribute is by getting better and performing at his best. You see a lot of the top athletes, they often talk about, they go out and although they're competing against the opponent, they're really just seeing, can I perform at my 100%? Because that's my best chance of beating my opponent. I'm sure that's what he would have meant there, yeah.
And do you see as well psychology in what managers are doing, what they're saying? I mean, because I know I do. Because, you know, since I've become really interested in the subject, read up on it more than I did in the past and stuff like that. Even the other day, I mean, we were talking about a podcast when we were coming down on the train to London, and there's a podcast with Jamie Carragher and Jordan Henderson. And he's throwing questions at Jordan Henderson, Jordan's answering them. But you can hear the psychology in his answers. So he talked about, no, we weren't down when we lost the cup final, because what we thought was next time we're in a cup final, we know what it's like and we know what we need to improve upon. And it's like, but the normal way we think as a fan, it would be they'd be gutted, you know, they won't get there again, they'd be down, they'd be beating themselves up. But obviously people at the club are making sure that isn't the case. And it ends up, you can hear Jordan's repeating the messages he's getting, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and you say like they don't think like a normal fan would. It's because they're not normal. So like, I think I can't remember what the stat was, about 0.01% of people who play football end up being a professional in the Premiership. So like, I don't want them thinking like 99.9% of people. I want them thinking like the 0.01 would, because that's what got them there. And also, as a fan, we live and breathe it, but this is their day-to-day job. And so like, playing and scoring in cup finals is what they expect themselves to be doing on a regular basis. So they'll know they'll have more if they keep improving. So of course that's not to say they're not disappointed, but the best chance of winning the next one is just to learn as much as they can from that. And so yeah, there will be people around the club and probably around the player as well, helping them come to that realisation. The younger players sometimes tend not to realise that because it feels all or nothing. Whereas players like Henderson, who's, you know, club captain, he's experienced enough to be able to manage that. Yeah.
Do you see any sort of clash between individual and the team when you're speaking to the players? And what I mean by that is obviously, we see, your Ronaldos or Messis, whatever, the absolute elite, and they're adored, they're on T-shirts, they're on games, they're on the front of the new FIFA when it comes out, whatever. And obviously, players will aspire to be that. They'll want to be that. They'll want that fame, maybe. They'll want the big car and all that kind of stuff. And again, that's counterproductive to being part of a team, though, isn't it? So do you ever have to sort of kind of point that out? Do you ever have to say, it's not about you getting 20 goals, it's about you being the best for your team?
So I was amazed when I first started working football about 10 years ago. Like, it is more of an individual sport than people realise. Like, each player has their own goals, their own ambitions, their own doubts and worries, and they're playing with other people, but they've got a very specific job to do on the pitch as well. So on one hand, it is an individual sport, but I think where you get the most buy-in is from those who want to be the standout player. Like, it's difficult to win the Ballon d'Or if you don't win the Champions League. So individual glory often comes as a result of team success. And I think when you get special clubs and special moments, which Liverpool feel like they are at the moment, where everyone's bought into the team glory, they know they've got more chance of standing out. So Henderson and Wijnaldum, they probably get more praise at the moment than they've ever got in their career because the team's doing so well. So one leads into the other.
Do you find that difficult then? Because that we've mentioned Gini and Henderson a couple of times now on these shows, and I think rightly so, because they're a fascinating case. But from your perspective, let's say Wijnaldum comes in to speak to you and he says, well, I'm being asked to do this role that actually I don't particularly want to do, but I understand it's good for the good of the club and we can achieve this collective success. When that collective success is win the Champions League, presumably that's an easier sell for the player than if let's say he's just playing for Leyton Orient, first club that comes into my head.
Nothing wrong with Leyton Orient.
And he's thinking, right, and the player's thinking, well, the manager's asked me to do something I don't want to do. I don't think that'll get the best out of me for the outside world looking in. And we're not doing anything anyway. This is for us to finish 10th instead of 15th. Is that a difficult conversation then? Because for his personal career, he's saying, well, I want to do something else. How do you handle something like that?
Absolutely. I always think my job isn't to tell people how to play football, and it isn't to really guide their career. My job is to help them execute their game as well as they can. And so it's not really about taking sides. And what's interesting is players who, say, take that example of the Leyton Orient player. The question is, say you're a centre mid and you're being asked to play out wide, and you don't want to do that because it's not your natural game. Like, on some level, you'd rather play out wide than be on the bench. And so kind of helping them make that, like, well, how can you make the most impact within this structure? So we can't change the structure or the team plan or philosophy, but your job is to be as effective as possible within that unit. What does that look like? And trying to guide them more towards that as opposed to focusing on the unfairness that they're being played out of position or anything like that.
Fascinating stuff again from Brad Busch. Do back Brad if you like by following him on social media. Inner Drive is where he's at. Look him up, get behind him because he's taken the time out to speak to us at the Anfield app, which we've been delighted by. That has been another Mind Games. There is more to come, and as ever, we're keen to hear what you thought of it all as well, so do let us know. That's been another Mind Games.